We're fortunate today to have a very attractive speaker on a very nice subject, Bill Logan. Bill is no stranger to the festival. He attended last year's festival on sacred soil, and he's written a book entitled Dirt, the Ischodic Skin of the Earth. He's also done an award-winning documentary, Dirt the Movie, and it's based upon his book theme, and this documentary was adopted as the official film of last year's festival. We have three very strong reasons also to be grateful for his presence. He's a distinguished arborist and founded the Urban Arborist in New York City. He is author of the book Oak, the Frame of Civilization, and he has recently completed a book on the subject of air, which is soon to be published. He's chosen the title Dendrofilia. I asked him to make sure I was pronouncing that correctly. This is beautiful but unfamiliar word, means love of trees, and it reflects the sentiments, of course, of all of us in this festival as well as beyond. Please join me in welcoming him, and he will be available for Q&A as we finish up. Bill?
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here. I have to say that last year, through Dirt the movie, hearing about this festival, I didn't think things like this happened anymore. They used to happen a long time ago to me at New York City in a place called the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And I didn't think it happened. So now here I am, and this is the second year I've been here, and every year it makes me feel alive again. So I'm just so grateful to be invited and to be here. Now, I don't know whether dendrophilia is actually a neologism, that is, whether I made the word up or whether it exists. But I think it's a very expressive word, and I think it's a word that has a lot of truth to it. Dendrophilia is the love of trees. I once wrote an article long ago called Confessions of a Dendrophiliac. At that time I was thinking I wasn't going to get to be in trees very much more because I was about 30. And next year I became an arborist. So I kind of got to be with them still. That actually is a picture of a tree that is one of my favorite trees. But I bet you that every one of you here can think of at least half a dozen favorite trees. And I think it's interesting that we do that. Now, I think it's E.O. Wilson who thinks that that has to do with the fact that we once swung in trees. I'm not sure that that's true. I don't want to say it's not true. But there are other reasons that we love trees. They're stable. They're taller than we are. They're older than we are. They're able to stay in the same place, unmoving, for hundreds of years. So in a way, their persistence, their stability, all these things are things that I think we love about them. I think we love trees before we know anything about them. But the more we know about them, the more we love them. And I think the more we have the opportunity to return or to make that love active by lovingly caring for them and doing the right thing by them, particularly when we try to bring them into cities. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a lot about today, because bringing a tree into a city is an act of hospitality. And if it's done with care and love, you get good results. And if it's not, you often get results that are not as pleasant. And I'm not saying love, but I'm saying love. I'm saying like paying attention to what the tree actually needs and responding to its actual needs are things that make trees much, much happier in the environments we put them in. What I want to briefly say is that my feeling is that, and I think this is true, is that air and trees are kind of the great symbionts on this planet. They require each other. Symbionts live together. They're in community together. They require each other in order to exist as they exist. And you say, well, what's the exchange? Well, what does a tree give the air? A tree gives the air water. If you try, most of what we get, the change that makes water vapor, the gas that goes into the air and forms the clouds, forms the power of storms, gets things traveling across the continents, is vaporized, comes from the power generated by vaporized water. And that water is in large part, not entirely, but in large part vaporized by plants. By the transport of water, liquid water, up through the roots, which then emerges in the little stomates, all the little holes under the leaves, emerges as water vapor, emerges as part of the air, and then goes to form all of the, form the clouds, form weather, form all that's going to happen in the air. So that's one very important thing that trees are giving to the air. And what does the air give the tree? Well, the air gives the tree carbon dioxide. which is going to become in the tree the basis of the shape and the molecules that give shape and flesh to everything on Earth, is derived from the carbon dioxide that comes in through those same little holes underneath the leaves. In comes the carbon dioxide, and at the leaves, where all the business end takes place, all the business of a tree, the making of food takes place in the leaves. I have many clients who want me to cut all the leaves off their trees so they won't cause any problems. I say, but I can't do that. That would be like if I took your stomach out. So you have to, I mean, so here we have the carbon dioxide coming in, but the other thing is water is kind of a mutual gift because the air also gives the tree the water, because it's that difference between these little, I'm going to show you a picture of them in a minute, the circulation system inside the tree, which is always completely full of liquid, and then outside, it's always much drier, right? So there's a pull, there's a tension that pulls really ropes of water, billions of them in each tree, up from the roots, up through the tree, and out into the air, right? But the byproduct of that is that a little bit of that water stays in the leaf. Doesn't go out into the air and make clouds. A little bit stays in the leaf. So you get the carbon dioxide coming in from the air, you get the water coming up from the ground, and those are the two materials out of which photosynthesis occurs. When then you have the energy of the sun comes in, and then all of a sudden you can make things. And the cool thing is that water, there's two parts to the reaction of photosynthesis. The first part is just about breaking up water to make energy and oxygen. So that's water's whole part of it. You make the energy by breaking up the oxygen, you create a little electron chain, there's all kinds of technical things that happen, and then the oxygen goes out into the atmosphere and we have the oxygen, and then the rest of it happens with the CO2 when the carbon is fixed and turned into these long chain molecules, and those molecules make both food, all sugar, and all structure. All the molecules that are going to be made for most living things, there are a few archaeans that don't need it, are going to be made of those. So you could see that this is a very important symbiosis for us, one without which neither we nor anything else that lives on this planet would likely be alive. And there are other things. I mean, and I saw a beautiful, I'm not even going to repeat them because there's a beautiful flyer downstairs at one of the tables. I think in the Native Tree Nursery has a flyer about ecosystem services of trees, which are fabulous. So all the details of that you can find down there, and I won't repeat them, but we know that trees not only take up carbon, which is kind of giving us a break in spite of our profligate pouring of carbon into the atmosphere. We're getting a break because every time forests regenerate, they sequester carbon. And just the small amount of regeneration happening in Amazon rainforest now is sequestering I think it's 5 billion metric tons of carbon every year. So that's a lot of carbon being taken out of the atmosphere by admittedly a large forest, but a large forest that is decimated. So if we undecimate that large forest, we might have a very large effect on the carbon pool that's in the atmosphere, and we might do a lot of good by doing it. So that's one ecosystem benefit that trees give us. They sequester carbon. The other thing is they take up a lot of pollutants. So many pollutants, soots and nitrous oxides and sulfur dioxide and many of the things that are pollutants that are problematic for us will also be taken up and sequestered by trees. And of course they change the temperature. Particularly deciduous trees, when you plant them around buildings, are going to significantly reduce your cost of air conditioning and also make it a lot more pleasant for you to walk in the summer under their shade than in the burning sun. So they do all kinds of benefits. They give us all kinds of benefits, but I think we love them before the benefits, and then I think the benefits come in and we love them more. This is just a few little pieces of data, which, the plants make 250 billion metric tons of sugar, that half that organic carbon is cellulose. The rainforest alone is sequestering 5 billion metric tons of carbon. I guess what I would like to do is talk a little bit about then this love of trees and carrying this love of trees into the city. No trees in that city. Horrifying. I don't think that this love of trees is limited to city people, and city people sometimes don't even understand it very well, but very often they do. Very often we love trees so much in the city that through ignorance we kill them with kindness. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of that in a moment. So a lot of what I do in New York City is try to help people understand how trees actually live and what they actually want so that we can actually give it to them. So we can create and maintain that incredible symbiosis that happens by giving them what they need in the ground and what they need in their crowns in order to live a long and prosperous and healthy and beautiful life for us and with us. Well, I was going to mention that, but I won't. Okay, I just got to mention this. A guy I talked about in Dirt, Clyde's pickup is a story about Clyde when he was in the hospital and a garden grew in the back of his truck. I often feel bad about people who've seen Dirt the movie. It makes you really worry about Clyde. I want to let you know that afterwards Clyde became a prince in Liberia. He met in a subway, not a subway, but in a cab. This taxi cab was being driven by a Liberian prince. He made a friendship with this Liberian prince who said, "You've got to come with me and meet my dad." So he went to Liberia. They met his dad, and they made Clyde a prince in Liberia. And the first thing that Clyde had to do as a prince in Liberia was to compose a poem. They gave him a section of land to be what he would take care of. And he had to go to the principal tree there, write a poem for it, and recite it to the tree. I think that's pretty cool. So Clyde came to a good end outside the city. But those of us who are left stuck in the city have to deal with situations like this, all right? Where we've got trees, no tree. This is in Long Island. This is just horrifying. I had to go out and take, I think, a license to like spray pesticides or something, some kind of license I had to have. I had to take a test in that building. I got out there and I went, good Lord, how can they possibly live here? Especially in the summer. I mean, it must be like 120 degrees there, not a single tree. But that's unusual now. It's unusual in New York, too, because mostly people really love and care for trees in the city, and often trees in the city are their only connection to nature, or their main connection to nature. So people can be crazy about them. This is a photo which I almost got run down in order to get this photo. As you can see, trees are, but this is a very famous, this is Sunnyside Gardens, one of the most famous Garden City projects and most successful Garden City projects in the United States. It's in Queens. It was done in the 30s, and it's still quite beautiful. And we take care of both the trees out here and also the trees. And there were common back gardens created. There's a lot of political difficulties with the common back gardens, but it's a very, very interesting project. But one of the things they did was they planted along the edge of these buildings double lines of London plane trees. And look at these. I mean, you couldn't go to Versailles and find a nicer double alley than that. What I wanted to take a picture of was the light was shining down this so that the canopies were partly illuminated and what was below was in darkness. And unfortunately, my picture didn't come out, but my God, is that beautiful. Those are just London plane trees, just regular old plain London plane trees on a regular old street, on a regular old neighborhood in New York. Now, admittedly, one of the reasons they're doing so well is that the buildings are low, which means that they can spread their canopy in the sun. And also, the curious thing is they're in kind of small tree pits, but they're also front gardens all the way along here. So long, long ago, the roots of those London planes have jumped right under the sidewalks and are out there having a wonderful time in the front gardens of the people. So those are kind of two hints for what make trees happy. Give them a sufficient place to put their canopy and also enough place to put their roots so that they can do what they do with water and air. This is in a neighborhood I only went by once. I had to see something on this block. I've never been there before or since. This, believe it or not, is a double alley of honey locusts. Now, they're not growing in typical honey locust habit because they're so closely planted together and they were destroying the sidewalks beneath them. But although this is something of a problem, in my view, I would rather have no sidewalks and that double alley of trees. They're just gorgeous. And again, because they don't have front gardens, unfortunately, so they're tearing up their sidewalk in order to figure out what to do with their roots. But again, an astonishingly beautiful thing in the middle of city and in the middle of what is actually quite a fairly depressed neighborhood, otherwise has just these astonishingly gorgeous trees. We once had this experience as tree guys. We had to go remove a Norway maple. It was so bad that it was going to kill somebody very, very soon. It had about a quarter inch, half an inch of sound wood all the way around. It was 28 inches in diameter. It was about 70 feet tall. It was going to hurt somebody. So we had to remove it, and everybody admitted we had to remove it. But when we got out there to remove it, we found this sign on it. It's about the squirrel named Henry who sleeps in the tree. And what they asked, they marked Henry's bed, and they asked us very politely if it were at all possible if we could preserve Henry's bed. We did preserve Henry's bed, and we told them, though, Henry will not come to his bed. Henry has many other beds right around here, and he will find a new one very soon. But it was wonderful to me to see that this family, that was their evening ritual, was to look out the window at the one tree in their view shed and have a relationship with it and with the creatures that lived in it. I think that was just fabulous. So This kind of thing we often find in New York, and we will sometimes have people lean. If we're going to prune trees in somebody's backyard, sometimes somebody, if they haven't been told, to lean out the window and say they're calling the cops because we're hurting their trees. And we have to explain, we're not hurting your trees, we're pruning your trees. But, you know, people care about these things. So it's really quite a wonderful thing. But people, one of the troubles is that people care about them so much that sometimes they do the wrong thing. That's one good example. This is a tree guard that was made to protect the tree from damage, but they put it there and forgot, and the tree grew up. So this metal tree guard, actually, this picture is taken after we had removed every piece of the tree guard we could without doing harm to the tree, but you can see that a lot of it has simply grown over it. So this was kind of a short-sighted thing. People said, well, really good, this will protect the tree. And then they figure out, oh, trees grow. So here's a grown tree, and nobody went and remembered about it, so this is a tree that's compromised. It's still alive, by the way, but it's compromised. The circulation system is compromised because sections of it we couldn't take out. So sections of it are actually not able to get water up from the base to the top. Also, it's in a 3x3 tree pit, but it has the good fortune to be in a sidewalk that is sand-laid bluestone, so it's getting a lot of stuff through there. It's lifting the bluestone, but that's the way it goes. Here's another one. This may actually have been malicious. But I'm not sure. I think maybe there's a lot of, one of the chief culprits, the things that people blame for tree damage in New York are dogs and their pee. So in order to keep dogs from peeing in your tree, one thing you could do is make sure that there's no way for them to do that. So they basically cemented all the way around this tree. And I think probably not maliciously, probably just thinking they were protecting the tree, but actually, of course, they're killing it because if air and water can't get to the root zone, that's the end for the tree. This was one thing, but the world champion effort to protect a tree that instead was killing it is the following. This is brilliant. I mean, no, this is like a fortress. This is a tree fortress, right? That's built up, and obviously they did this with the best intentions, because not only did they cut all this incredible thing out of sheet metal, but they also decorated it. And then they built this up and they painted it all a kind of tasteful black, which must heat up by 15 or 20 degrees in the summer. But the poor tree, but it obviously wasn't done with bad intent. It was done to save and protect the tree. Now, you know, you can look at these, and these are obviously kind of problems, right, to most people, but there are a lot of things we've been doing to trees for years and years and years that are almost that bad in cities. So one of the things that I think we need to do is to really learn tree hospitality. We're taking them to places where they don't normally grow. And when we do, we need to remember this is how they live. They take all this material out of the ground. They pass it up to the air. The air gives things back to them. We have to make sure that they're able to do that. So if we're giving them loving care, we have to learn what they really need in the crown, in the ground, and do our best to give it to them. In the cities, we can't do it quite as we would do it elsewhere, but we can do a lot better than we are. And a lot of the things I want to look at now are ways to do that. I love the fact that trees and plants are the autotrophs, the only creatures that feed themselves. Everything else feeds on them. First stem and the root are primary for the tree. They're fed by energy that's stored in the seed. When it sprouts, then the tree is on its own. It goes up, it goes down, and its rest of its life has to be in the sun. It has to spend the rest of its life getting by photosynthesis and spending for everything else. So the first thing that we have is, I like to use scientist words because, you know, you could say the seed coat breaks, but instead, because of water that soaks into it, but instead you could say imbibition. They imbibe water, but the cool thing is that cellulose molecules and water molecules are both polar, that is, they have a plus and a negative side. So the reason this happens is that when water soaks into them, the plus and negative side of the cellulose and the water try to line up, and the result is the cellulose gets torn apart. So it splits, and all of a sudden out comes the radical, out comes the proto-root, out comes the proto-shoot, and away the tree goes. It's interesting that this same process is what the Egyptians used to break blocks for the pyramids. They would take a wooden block, stick it in, make a small crack, stick it in the crack, and fill it with water, and they could make the crack bigger and bigger and eventually split a block out of it. So it's a powerful, powerful force that's doing that. So that's the beginning of a tree's life. When its life begins, it then knows which way it's going. This is the coolest thing. People do this experiment. They will take a stem with its shoots up here and its roots down here and turn it over. Well, the roots will still grow down and the shoots will still grow up, even though they're in the opposite position to what they should be, which is quite cool. And this crazy lady here, whom I met, she said, "Oh, yes, that's true. I proved it." I said, "This is at Mass Museum of Contemporary Art. She planted a bunch of red maples upside down." To my mind, this is kind of tree torture. But it's interesting, and it does prove the point on a large scale. There's the first year of the trees in the ground, and you can see that already the stems are kind of growing this way instead of that way. This is the next year. The trees have shortened, and they're clearly going this way now. So if these trees survive yet another year, they're going to be eventually up, the branches will be up over here, even though they started out facing down. They're going to reverse it and grow upwards. So trees know where they're growing. The roots know that they want to grow down and out. The trees know, the shoots know that they want to grow up and out. They want to fill canopy, and they want to explore the ground. But the question is, how do you get from this little thing, which has its first shoot and its first roots, up to something like that? Well, you do it by multiplication. Trees don't have anywhere near as many organs as we do. They've got roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, that's all. But they have lots of them, and they're repeated, and they happen again and again and again. So if you start with 2 branches in a tree, in 4 years, if all the branches that sprout survive, you'll have 80. And if they all survived, after 15 years, you'd have 14 million branches. Well, they don't all survive. You usually only have about 6 orders of branches that survive on a tree because of all the things that happen to trees. But still, that's a lot. And when I want to know who did this. Somebody claims to have counted the root system of a mature red oak and found 90 million fine roots. It probably would have taken him his whole lifetime to count them. I think he extrapolated. I think he found a group of roots and counted them and then extrapolated. But a lot. So there's a lot of multiplication that goes on that makes this happen. Here's it happening with branches, and here is it happening with roots. And the numbers are the different orders. So first order root comes out, then a second order root from that, sometimes a third order root from the second order root, a fourth order root from the third order root. Again, multiplication of the same thing, the same process happening again and again. And the exploration of the soil that takes place in trees depends upon where the good things are for a tree in the soil, and chiefly they're in the top couple of feet of the ground. Now, if the soil is very sandy, you can find roots much deeper. Ed Gilman in Florida, who has very sandy soils, has found roots 60 feet down. Spelunkers have brought him roots from caves. So in a sandy soil, they can go very deep. But typically, the trees that are actually taking up water and nutrients are in the top 18 inches of soil. So the tree spreads much more than it goes up and down. It may have a taproot, at least as a young tree, and very often has sinker roots, very often has roots that are to help it with its stability. But most of what's happening is happening in the top couple of feet of the soil. And they're going to go, generally speaking, roots are going to go where they'll find water and air, and they follow a gradient of oxygen, which is one reason why, you know, when we're planting trees in the city, a big problem is when you plant them too deep, you find a lot of problems. One thing is roots asphyxiate if they're too deep because they're not getting oxygen. The other thing is they don't know where to go. So because they're using oxygen, typically roots will grow along where they find oxygen, out away from the trunk. If they don't find any oxygen, they have no way to orient themselves and no way to tell how to travel. So instead of traveling out, they may travel around, and we may get generations of girdling roots that kill the trees. So that's what's happening under the ground. Up in the sky, we have leaves exploring the sky. It's very cool to me that according to how a plant grows, it will find ways to best display its leaves. So a plant that has opposite branches, you have opposite or alternate branches. If you have opposite branches, you tend to put them at 90-degree angles. Couple leaves here, couple leaves at 90 degrees, couple leaves at 90 degrees, so that when seen from above, you've got something that is pretty much exposing all the leaf surface to the sun, because the point is that the leaf is what's making the food and needs the solar energy to do it. So that's what happens. That's an opposite bearing plant. An alternate plant typically does it spirally. That is, the branches will be arranged in a spiral around the stem, again with the same point, to expose as much as possible to the sun. Some will do it by having, like beeches will have it by doing a combination of long and short shoots. So it'll send out long exploratory shoots and then shorter shoots off those, so that each of those can take maximum advantage of the sun. And here is the way that the stuff gets from the roots, from the ground, up into the sky, through the tree, up into the leaves, and finally to the sky. This is the xylem structure of a plant. This is from a wonderful book that is almost totally incomprehensible because half of it is in the higher mathematics. But it's written by a guy who looks, acts, and talks like a Georgia truck driver. It's called Xylem Structure and the Ascent of the Sap, and his name is Mel Tyree. And Mel Tyree understands more about how water gets through trees probably than anyone who's ever lived. And this is a diagram that he did of a small section of a tree about so big. And they were able to trace the vessels, that is the cells that carry the water and the nutrients up the tree to the leaves. They were able to trace those inside this small block of wood. Now actually this is the same block of wood, they've simply exploded it into two so you can see more clearly the pattern of vessels in it. But it is quite astonishing to me that trees are able to grow into the sky the way they are because they develop, especially this kind of a cell. These cells are all connected to one another, and they don't start working until they die. Xylem cells are empty. Water has to pass through them. So they grow, they live, they die, and only when they die do they begin to function. Because all the cell contents are evacuated, and then they are filled with water, and they're connected up to those tiny holes underneath the leaves, the stomates. And each one of those is connected to at least a few stomates. And as the stomates open, it's drier outside than it is inside. So up comes the water, is drawn up through the tree and out through the stomates, all through this millions and millions and millions in even a small tree of these vessel cells. And the cool thing about these cells is not only are they individual lines of cells that climb, also every time they meet, they form a connection. So one cell can pass water to another cell. That way, if a tree is wounded, you may lose a whole lot of these, but it'll just find a way around. It'll take other pathways because every time two of these vessels elements meet, they will tend to create a connection between them. So it's an amazing system that allows this to happen in the tree. This is just an electron microscopy of some of it. There's a connector. That's a side connector between two vessels that are against each other. This is an end-to-end connector. These are actually tracheids, which are the conifers version of the same thing. But that's all of what's allowing this to happen.